I tell you what, man, those Ducks played their best game of the year. Well done, Oregon. And everybody involved, by the way. The atmosphere was tremendous. I thought Ohio State traveled well, which they should and do. And then the game lived up to the billing. 2 versus 3, and we got an absolute classic. This was very similar, not in style of game, but just in feeling of the overall size and scope of the game and quality of the game as we had earlier in the year in Tuscaloosa when Georgia and Alabama got all tangled up. I tell you, hard. I'm just going to be this guy. It's hard to argue with super conferences now, isn't it? I mean, think of the games that we have had, and this one's certainly right up there at the top of the list. Oregon with a huge win, 32-31 in an absolute classic at home. Okay, so much to get into because there were so many things that could be storylines coming out of this game. Let me just start with this. This is the Oregon that we all expected to see in the offseason. These Ducks started slow, but it's been a little bit of a slow build, and that was a game that we have anticipated for Oregon for a long time. And in particular, their quarterback number 8, Dillon Gabriel. If you're watching YouTube, you just watched him run in. Dan Lanning's got to be thrilled with the way his quarterback played. I've watched Dillon Gabriel for a long time. That was one of the better games that I've ever seen Dillon Gabriel play. He was sensational. He really was. The downfield passing attack for Gabriel, the clutch runs late in the game, the touchdown run, making people miss in the secondary. He was tremendous. 373 total yards, 3 total touchdowns in a huge win. And really, it was the fact that he did it outside of what I think his strengths are. I've told you for a long time that this guy is a card dealer. He's a point guard. That's what this offense was going to be. And you saw a game plan from Ohio State that was designed to stop that. And I'll get into the X's and O's a little bit more as we go along. But first and foremost, to see him throw the ball down the field like he did, that was incredible. So kudos to Dillon Gabriel. And for me, he just launched himself a Heisman campaign right here in October, and that's what you need. You need stages to launch a Heisman campaign, and that's exactly what Dillon Gabriel did on Saturday night. He was tremendous. Not many mistakes from Gabriel the entire night. Oregon, nearly 500 yards of offense, 7.5 per play. They ran it for 5 a carry. They did not allow a sack. I tell you, man, this guy was really good, Gabriel. And the offensive line, you got to give them credit. Do you remember early in the season when I was telling you, like, what is wrong with Oregon's offensive line? They were giving up far too many sacks, far too many pressures. Gabriel was under pressure nearly 40% of the time of his dropbacks, but he was never sacked. He did a great job of manipulating the pocket. In fact, as a lefty, it was eerily similar, although not completely, but it reminded me a lot of Penix's performance against Texas last year in the playoff, because there was some pressure, not a lot, not as much as Texas was putting on Penix, but there was some, and Gabriel kept manipulating the pocket, getting himself into the correct area in order to make throws down the field, and he made brilliant throws down the field. That defense for Ohio State got lit up, folks. This is a lot more of what we saw late in the season in 2022 from Ohio State, when they gave up giant plays. In fact, that's 7 yards per play that Ohio State gave up Saturday night against Oregon. They haven't given up a game where they gave up more than 7 yards per play dating back to 2022. Last year was a year in which they prevented the explosive play, and that did not happen on Saturday night. Credit Oregon, because I thought their game plan was tremendous, but also Ohio State falling back into that trap. A lot of man coverage on the outside, and let's face it, Evan Stewart just kind of beat up Denzel Burke. That was a matchup that Oregon won. And we were wondering for a long time, like, when was this going to happen for Oregon on the outside with some of those talented wide receivers? Well, it happened in the moment that they needed it most. So let's get into kind of like some of the aspects of what we need to walk through in this game, because there are plenty. That was an overarching Oregon thought. Now let's go to the Ohio State defense. What do we think about the Ohio State defense after that game? Well, obviously, something needs to change. Let me tell you what the film showed for the Ohio State defense, because I think it's important that we don't just fall into gross narratives, all right? Because I will be the first one to tell you that nearly 500 yards, the 7.5 per play, the 5 per carry didn't feel like that on the film. It felt like Ohio State was playing really good defense, and then bang, it would be a big play. Okay, really good defense, bang, big play. And so then you've got to go back to the drawing board and you've got to understand, well, why? Why are these big plays happening against Ohio State's defense and for Oregon's offense? Well, I think unfortunately for the Buckeyes, and this speaks to the quality of the way that Oregon played, there were a few different issues for Ohio State's defense. Number one, I would say that it was not a great tackling night for the Buckeyes. So that's one thing that jumped off the tape. In space, they did not tackle well. Great defenses always tackle well. Now, what ends up happening, though, is that a team that doesn't tackle well and plays man coverage, those missed tackles, it's like throwing gasoline on a fire. They are magnified when you play man coverage. And Ohio State was largely, not exclusively, but largely in man coverage. So when you saw a missed tackle, it immediately became 10, 15, 20 yards. Boom, there it happened. Okay, when you play zone, like let's say in Iowa or a team that's predominantly zone, and one guy misses the tackle, there are eyes on that guy, and generally people surrounding, swarming, and pursuing that ball carrier, and they're not chasing a man. And so what happens is that you minimize the impact or mistake of the missed tackle. Okay, so that's the missed tackle part. Here's another thing that I saw. And this is a more schematic thing. And it's a little bit tougher to understand, but I'm going to do my best. So Ohio State, I'm going to use a technical term here. They were running field defense quite often. And that means that the defensive lineman that is considered a 3 technique, which means the outside shoulder of the guard, was to the wide side of the field predominantly. It didn't necessarily follow the tight end or the strength of the offense as much as it was called to the wide side of the field. Now, here's what that did. If you did put the tight end, okay, the strength of the offense to the wide side of the field, which coincided with the 3 technique, the opposite defensive tackle was a 1 technique. Okay, so a lot of technical terms here. Here's where the 1 technique lines up. He's right on the center, outside shoulder of the center. Okay, so if you're looking at the short side of the field, there is a 1 technique, which is lined up on the center, and then a guy lined up all the way outside of the tackle. So between the guard and the tackle on that short side of the field, there is an opening. The linebacker has to be responsible for that gap in run defense. And here's what was happening, is that they were not defending that B gap, the gap just between the guard and the tackle. Please be following me right now. I know that it's difficult if you're just listening, but that's what's going on. And Oregon was hurting them on what I would consider to be short side or boundary, the short side of the field, runs to the 1 technique. And when that happened, Ohio State didn't really adjust in time, at least. And now later in the game, they would put the 3 technique to the short side of the field and the 1 technique to the wide side of the field. They didn't adjust in time. So in general, the bigger runs all happened to the short side, and because of that, and the safety wasn't coming down, and the linebacker was not filling into that gap, the B gap, and that's where they were exploiting Ohio State's defense. So 2 things so far. Why did Ohio State give up a bunch of big plays? Well, number 1, missed tackles, and they were magnified because they were playing man defense, and 2, they did not adjust the structure when Oregon started to attack what was clearly a weakness in structure of their defense in the run game, and that was to the short side of the field in that B gap. And then the last thing was just they didn't get enough pressure on the quarterback. And when you don't get enough pressure on the quarterback, your defensive backs will be beat. Okay, there's not a defensive back on the face of the planet that can cover for long as Oregon was giving Dillon Gabriel to throw. There just was not enough pressure on him, so they were able to run big, deep, double move routes, meaning the wide receiver was going to stop, fake like he's running a shorter route, and then take off. And so a couple of different times, Denzel Burke got beat on double move routes on the outside. But here's the thing, as a corner, you're trying to bank on the fact that your rush will get there and that you're not going to have to defend for 3 seconds. I can defend for 1.8, 2.1, 2.2 seconds, maybe 2.5, but you expect me to defend for 3 seconds. That's going to be tough, in particular against the speed of Oregon. Those were the three things that I saw on film for the Ohio State defense. Was it all bad? No. Did it feel like a game in which they gave up almost 500 yards and 7.5 per play and 5 per carry? No. What it seemed like is that Ohio State would play really well for about 6 or 7 plays. And then on the 8th play, bam, they would be exploited, whether it was missed tackles, structure, or a lack of pressure. That's what I saw. There was other things that are like very technical that I don't want to get into. The last thing that I would just say is that I thought Oregon's 4th and 1 call was brilliant. If you didn't see it, it's hard to explain. I'll just tell you that like the Oregon coaching staff did a great job throughout the game in those crucial moments. And the 4th and 1 was one of those calls offensively. Okay, so now let's move on. So now we've talked about Dillon Gabriel, how great he was, throwing the ball really well down the field. He was 4 of 4 for 177 yards and a touchdown, throwing the ball 20 yards or more downfield. That's not his MO, and he did it really well. Then we got to the Ohio State defense. 3 reasons why they gave up a lot of big plays. One was mixed tackles. One was a lack of adjustment in structure, at least in my estimation, in the run game. And the other was a lack of pressure on the quarterback. And then you get to the Ohio State offense. Okay, so the Ohio State offense played really well. And everyone's going to be talking about Will Howard after this game because of the way that the game ended. I think it's important to note that through the entirety of the game, Will Howard played a tremendous game. In fact, when you're watching on film, the more efficient and effective offense through the course of the game is Ohio State's. Whereas Oregon was having to get the explosive play in order to drive the football down the field, which they did. It was Ohio State that was more efficient. They were the ones, gathering up yards, making first downs, holding the ball. But the problem is that there was 2 or 3 really big moments where Will Howard did not play well. And now everyone's going to be remembering that. And clearly the end of the game is one of those. Just those 3 moments that I had starred. There was a 3rd and 3 when they're up, I think it was 28-15 or something, and he just drops the snap. If they get that 3rd down, they're going to drive down and probably get some points and maybe extend the lead. But as it was, the score becomes 29-28 because he drops the snap on 3rd and 3 and they've got to punt it away. The next one was a 3rd and 13 on the next to last drive. It's the 4th quarter. They've got a penalty, so it's 3rd and 13. And he's got Jeremiah Smith at the sticks and he's late with the ball. And it's incomplete because he tries to throw it too far away from him. So that was the second mistake. So those are the only mistakes he's making. Trust me, I'm like watching this film. He played a brilliant game outside of these 3 mistakes. And then the last one was he didn't know how much time was on the clock. And he didn't get down soon enough to get the timeout called in order to get the field goal. So that's the Will Howard angle. And then you've got to look at this just from the entirety of the management of the game at the end. Okay, so let's talk really quickly about the ending sequence of that game because there was a lot going on. First and foremost, Ohio State drives down the field. And the first thing that happens is like Will's playing great, right? The wide receivers are playing. Emeka had a great game. Jeremiah had a great game. I thought Travion should have gotten more carries, but that's beside the point. That would take too long to get into. They drive it all the way down to the 28-yard line. All right. So at one point on the last series of the game, there's 34 seconds left. It's 1st and 10 from the 28-yard line. They are in field goal range. They have to feel like they have a field goal, points, a win in their back pocket. So at this point, you're just thinking to yourself like, okay, we're not putting the ball in a precarious spot. I wouldn't have minded a run play at that moment and force Oregon to start taking their timeouts so that, you can just end the game with the field goal and leave them no time. That wouldn't have been terrible. But at the 28-yard line, you're still talking about a 45-yard field goal. So this is college. You still are going to want more room. You want to get closer. So they throw an incompletion. Now it's 28 seconds. It's 2nd and 10. And now the play happens that I think cost Ohio State the game. They're in field goal range. You feel like you're probably 82% going to win the game at that point. That's about the percentage that you would think from 43. Maybe you get a few more yards, you up that percentage. And they're just trying to throw the ball to Jeremiah Smith on the short side of the field. And lo and behold, they call an offensive pass interference. I was shocked watching the game that they called the offensive pass interference. I talk with officials all the time. And generally speaking, here's what it comes down to. For offensive pass interference, they want to see a clear extension. All right. They want to see the arm clearly extend in order to gain separation. Now, was there contact between Jeremiah Smith and the corner? Yes. And was it physical? Yes. There's no doubt. Now, on the film, all night it had been physical. And in fact, the play previous, Jeremiah Smith is being held the entire time he's trying to run a corner route. Like, it was a physical game. And they had let them play for the most part throughout the entirety of the game. And then all of a sudden the corner squats. Jeremiah Smith is running his route and contacts the corner and then breaks out. Doesn't extend. Again, he doesn't push off in order to create the space, and the flag comes out. I thought it was a bad call. Just kind of point blank. And I would say that for anybody. Why? Because based on my conversations with officials, he didn't extend. He doesn't push. All right. Is there contact? Yes. Is there contact on every play before that? Yes. So the fact that the flag comes out there, I thought was, it was a poor call. It was a poor call. Now, having said that, this is where it gets dicey for Ohio State because of what I'm about to tell you. The play ends up in bounds. It's a completion. And so the clock is running. All right. As a quarterback and as an offense, as a player, you've got to understand that whatever stops the clock starts the clock. Here's what I mean by that. If an official stops the clock in order to administer something, right? A penalty, something's going on technically, then the official is going to start the clock on the ready for play, and he's going to wind it. If the ball stops the clock by being incomplete, going out of bounds, something along those lines, then the ball or the snap starts the clock. So as soon as Jeremiah Smith is in bounds and the officials stop the clock to administer the offensive pass interference, somebody needs to be telling everybody like, hey, clock is going to start on the ready for play. I would love to know what Will Howard was hearing in the headset, because obviously we have coach-to-player communication now, and Chip Kelly is talking to him in the headset. And it looked like to me that Will was screaming at everybody like, come on, let's go, let's go. And you can kind of see him and his hands are going like this. And again, this is on the play, not before the run, but after the offensive pass interference, when time is ticking down and down and down, and they're losing valuable time. I wouldn't have minded seeing them take a timeout at that point, just because it's like the time might be more valuable at that moment. Now, you can argue with me on that, and that's totally fine. But this idea is that I didn't feel like the offensive line was ready. Will was screaming at the offensive line to get themselves going, and I don't think they realized that the clock was going. So the unit, the offense, wasn't ready to snap the football. I don't think that was a Will Howard issue, because I see him on the film screaming and imploring his guys like, come on, we've got to go. The clock is rolling. So they lose some valuable time at that point. So at that point, now you get to the last couple of snaps, and there's 10 seconds to go, and all of a sudden Oregon takes a timeout. And now Oregon, after the timeout, they come out onto the field, they run a defensive lineman off the field, and then all of a sudden late, like really late, right before the snap, a corner just steps on the field in order to play. And I'm like, it's really hard for me, based on the way that the film looks, it's hard for me to think that it was anything other than completely brilliant strategy from Dan Lanning in Oregon. I don't think it was a mistake from Oregon. I might be wrong, okay? I might be wrong. But I do think that they put the 12th player out there in order for the snap not to count and to take extra time off the clock.
Thank you for watching the Joel Klatt Show YouTube channel. And if you liked this clip, make sure to like it and subscribe to the channel, and you can stay up to date on all of my college football coverage.